from Michael Benson is creating a lot of buzz, creating a lot of hubbub. The tweet itself reads that the WBC have announced that Canelo Alvarez is their first WBC franchise middleweight champion. As a result, they have upgraded interim champion Jermall Charlo to world champion status. Yay. Long story short, this is similar to the WBA Super regular champion situation. Now, if this news checks out, that the WBC has added yet another designation to all the different varying designations they have already, this further convolutes and waters down the middleweight division. This move, I have no doubts, is going to create a lot of confusion in the boxing community amongst the boxing fans. Recent article detailing the story from Boxing Scene reads,
"Get a load of this.
By doing this, the WBC removes Canelo from his position as middleweight champion, and in doing so, they have made the interim champion, Jermall Charlo, the full middleweight champion." And, you know, this is going to confuse a lot of people moving forward, because what does that then mean as far as Canelo's run at becoming an undisputed champion? If he's been removed as the WBC's champion and given some other designation, and Charlo is the WBC's middleweight champion, doesn't that then mean that the titles today are split 3 ways instead of just 2? And just what exactly does it mean to be a WBC franchise champion? What exactly does that entail? Well, according to the article, apparently, the WBC outlines certain conditions for their franchise champion. Number 1, the franchise champion will be designated as WBC Emeritus Champion once he retires from the sport of boxing. Number 2, the franchise champion will proudly represent the WBC in every single fight as a reigning WBC champion, regardless of any specific conditions or titles being associated with all future fights. WBC rules and regulations will govern under the traditional conditions of boxing in the franchise champion's fights. WBC will approve through the franchise champion promoter every opponent scheduled fight. Number 3, the franchise champion agrees to participate in a minimum of 2 social responsibility events every year, organized and in conjunction with the WBC. Number 4, the WBC may recognize a WBC champion in the division or divisions where the franchise champion currently competes. And number 5, the WBC may award a Diamond Championship belt in those fights in which the franchise champion engages. If the franchise champion loses, the winner will receive the Diamond belt and may be considered as a mandatory contender of the division. Ladies and gentlemen, you talk about what's right with the sport of boxing, and then you talk about what is wrong with the sport of boxing. And this move from the WBC is everything that's wrong with the sport of boxing. It waters down the division, it waters down what it means to be a champion, and it waters down the sport overall, and it convolutes it to the point to where the casual observer is not going to know who the actual full WBC champion really is when you've got all these different designations. I mean, before this news broke, as far as people knew, Canelo was the WBC champion, and Charlo was the champion in the interim. Yet now, Canelo is something else, and I guess Jermall Charlo, he's the full champion. What's even more bizarre about this is that in making Jermall, I mean, if that's what's going on, that's what the story says, make of that what you will, and if that checks out, if Jermall Charlo is now the full WBC champion, he's got the full version of the title in that weight class, and Canelo has been relegated to being something else entirely, the strange thing about it is that's not going to change the pecking order. Most people at the weight or around it are going to be targeting Canelo. They're not going to be targeting Jermall if Canelo is campaigning in that same weight class. Let's call a spade a spade. They're going to want the money fight. They're going to want the cash fight. They're going to want the big fight, the Canelo fight. And whether he's a French fry champion, franchise, I'm sorry, it sounds so similar. But whether he's a French fry champion or a world champion, one way or another, he's the guy that people are going to be going after, making the WBC's full title almost meaningless. I mean, at least at that weight, because at that weight, you've got a French fry champion and a world champion and an interim champion and a diamond and a silver and pretty soon they're going to have a pearl belt floating around up there, similar to the pearl belt that's going to be on the line in the Khan versus Dib fight. Essentially, what I'm getting at is the WBC and looking out for their own best interests are very much giving the sport of boxing a black eye. What does this do for the quest for one guy holding all the belts? What does this do for what actually is conducive towards the sport of boxing? Absolution via undisputed champions. When one guy is holding all the belts. What does this do in terms of that? Because the appearance of this move very much looks like the titles are now split 3 ways, where before they were only split between 2. You understand? Canelo had 3 of the 4, and Andre had the remaining title, whereas now it does seem as if Charlo is the WBC champion. He's the guy you go to for that belt. Andre's got the WBO, he's still got that. And now Canelo, he's got 2 full world titles and a designation. A honorary designation, a special privilege, whatever the fuck you want to call it. What he's got is not the full title. It does appear that Jamal's got that. There's a bit of poetic justice in that you know what? Jamal Charlo
did earn a shot.
Was a guy who was in line for a title shot that he really didn't get. And while this may seem anticlimactic, elevating him to what's supposed to be such a prestigious position, the WBC being the most prestigious of all the 4, alphabets, you tell me, where is the prestige in this? I mean, in all honesty, I know there's a lot of long-winded paragraphs intended to explain just what exactly this designation is and what purpose it serves, but, when you break it down to brass tacks, when you try to just,
understand it, and
simplify it to its most simplest form, it does appear that what they've done is they've made Jamal the full champion and Canelo something else. But what he isn't is a unified champion holding 3 belts. That doesn't appear to be what he is. He's going to be recognized as some kind of a champion, and that's fan-fucking-tastic. But as far as the quest for an undisputed champion goes, well, it does appear that, I don't know, I guess Canelo's only holding, at least now, 2 of the 4. That in and of itself begs certain questions. Was this move influenced by something that Canelo Alvarez has in the works? The WBC is bending to Canelo Alvarez's will right now. They're working very hard to stay within his good graces. It being that, they kind of chapped his ass and stuck up his crawl with the whole Gennady Golovkin stuff 2 years ago. He wasn't happy about that, but they've tried to make amends as best as they can, and they've worked hard to, really stick their nose in his ass. And this looks like that. That's what this looks like. This could be the prelude to something else. There are a lot of talks right now about a potential Canelo Alvarez versus Sergey Kovalev fight. Sergey Kovalev, who is supposed to be in some kind of transition to fighting Anthony Yarde in the near future, even though I don't really feel any closer to that. I don't know how you guys feel, but I don't feel any closer to that than I did a couple of months ago. That's still a fight that, I'm going to have to see it to believe it, because I'm not believing it. Better still, there have been rumblings about a fight like that the last couple of days. Canelo Alvarez versus Sergey Kovalev. There have been those rumblings. A recent article from World Boxing News detailed both Kathy Duva and Sergey Kovalev's reaction to the proposition of Canelo Alvarez potentially moving up to what would be his 4th weight class to challenge Sergey Kovalev, who's still waiting for details to be ironed out for that Anthony Yarde fight I mentioned. And they're open to it, which is what you would expect. That, Sergey Kovalev, of course he'd like a fight against the little guy moving up in weight who's worth a lot of cash. Who wouldn't? So his reaction to it is obvious. Just as well, Kathy Duva's reaction to it is obvious, that they respect it, they commend it, he's a throwback fighter, we welcome the opportunity. I mean, it's all stuff that you expect to hear. But, given all the different news that is coming out, you really do have to wonder, what is behind this move from the WBC, and what does it entail? How does that relate to Canelo Alvarez? Because he's obviously directly involved with the news. If it were a Golovkin fight in September, you wouldn't have to go to these lengths, you understand. That if Canelo Alvarez had made up his mind and decided to, let's say, have a rubber match with Golovkin, this move wouldn't be necessary at all. There has to be a reason, there has to be a purpose that the WBC went to these lengths and outlined all these different bylaws, all this fine print. There has to be a purpose behind that, and it's not quite clear and apparent. I mean, it can't be a Golovkin rubber match, because if that's what if that's what Canelo were going to do, there wouldn't be a need for this kind of a move. And it can't be I mean, a unification fight? Like, why would they do this? Like, let's say Canelo Alvarez has his sights set on the winner of Andrade versus Suliecki. Why would this move be necessary then? That would bring Canelo, one step closer to becoming an undisputed champion. There has to be a reason that a special designation was set aside for Canelo Alvarez. The talks have already begun, ladies and gents. There are people out there saying that this designation that the WBC has so created was just a way to disguise Canelo Alvarez vacating his title to get out of a Charlo fight. There are people out there already saying this. I mean, I've seen it. And to those people, I'll say this. It's not that I'm ruling out what those people are saying, but what I am saying is that the WBC wasn't going to put any pressure on Canelo to fight Jamal anyway, so they wouldn't have needed to do this from the get-go. You understand? You comprendo? That the WBC is so obviously giving Canelo Alvarez special treatment that they could have delayed Jamal Charlo's title shot a couple more months to another year, because Jamal himself, according to him, he wasn't worried about it. According to Jamal, in regards to the WBC, in regards to Canelo, and the title shot that never was, guess what? He wasn't concerned with that. He was focused on living his best life. I mean, in all honesty. So he wasn't hitting the gas on it, and the WBC wasn't hitting the gas on it, and it didn't seem like a priority to Canelo. So all these things in mind, it really wouldn't be necessary to come up with a special designation for Canelo in this situation, because nobody's hitting the gas on that fight. Thus, there wouldn't need to be a resolution, because I guess there doesn't seem to be a problem. So this move can't have anything to do with that.
Or can it?
Can it? Look, I'll be honest. This is confusing, even to me, who's accustomed to sifting through just these kinds of articles to find where the bullshit is and where the bullshit isn't. And this is confusing, even to me. But my basic understanding of this situation is that Canelo Alvarez is something other than the WBC champion. Something more, something less. I'll leave those distinctions up to you. But what he's not is the WBC champion. That does appear to be Jamal Charlo's current title. And there are going to be people that interpret this move as a means to circumvent a fight with him. And I'm not quite sure that I'm sold on that. I mean, I'm not sold on that. Jamal Charlo looked very human in his last fight. Very human in his last fight against Matt Korobov, a guy who hadn't faced an elite opponent in a very long time. And that guy kind of exposed Jamal Charlo. I mean, Jamal Charlo in that instance, the last time we saw this guy in action, didn't look like a guy who anybody should be running from, let alone a Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez, who just swapped punches with what was the IBF champion, Daniel Jacobs. I mean, did you guys forget? He just fought that guy, okay? And that guy, Daniel Jacobs, is perceived as being the same as or more than a credible threat in the middleweight division, having far more experience at the weight than Jamal. Canelo just fought that guy. So the idea that he's all of a sudden going to throw that belt in the air just because of Charlo?
I don't know.
I'm not sold on that. I'm not sold on that because, one, Charlo really didn't look good in his last fight. I mean, let's be honest, he didn't. It's okay to have an off night, but better still, he didn't look good. So that's one. Two, the WBC already bends to Canelo's will. So if Canelo doesn't want to fight Jamal Charlo, all they'll do is just delay his title shot even further. Same shit they're doing with Dillian White. He wouldn't have to vacate his title if he didn't want to fight Jamal Charlo. He'd simply plop it under his ass, and they'd let him. So I'm not sold that that's the reason behind this move. I think there's something else going on here. There's more to it than meets the eye right now, and we're going to find out what's really going on as time progresses. But to that narrative, which I'm sure is going to become a prevalent narrative in the coming days, weeks, and months,
that Canelo ducking Jamal.
I'm not convinced that Jamal Charlo is the reason that this is going on. I'm not sold on that. I'm not convinced of that. Now, in regards to the WBC and how this reflects for them, the WBC that some people like to call the most prestigious of the four organizations, of the four alphabets, or the four world titles in circulation. The WBC is often characterized by many boxing fans, many ignorant boxing fans, but better still, many boxing fans, as the most prestigious of the four. But when you try to characterize that prestige in light of these kinds of moves, what characterizes them as being the most prestigious? The fact that they're the most unethical? The fact that they're often associated with the most corruption and sketchy dealings? You tell me what makes them the most prestigious, because it's not history. They're not the oldest of the 4 sanctioning bodies. That's the WBA. So what makes the WBC the most prestigious when you see these kinds of moves are actually commonplace? Where's the prestige? You tell me. Where's the prestige in having all these different belts in circulation, and what distinguishes one from the other? If a diamond champion can become a mandatory the same as an interim champion, then why are there 2 designations instead of 1?
Yeah.
And if the silver championship can't get you a mandatory spot until you get into an interim spot, then what the fuck do you have a belt like that in circulation for?
Yeah.
These various novelty items, trinkets, and commemorative belts, they take away from whatever prestige the WBC might have had.
However long ago that was.
I mean, I'm not seeing a high abundance of prestige. I'm seeing a high abundance of unethical practices. I'm seeing a high abundance of meaningless trinkets and novelty items that don't service any purpose and don't add any actual value to a contest. What I'm seeing is that the WBC is regularly watering down the sport of boxing, and some boxing fans are too ignorant to see it. That, you know what? Maybe the WBC was the most prestigious of the 4 world titles, or when there were 3, or whatever. You know, because this is the 4 belt era, but guess what? It wasn't always a 4 belt era. There used to be a 3 belt era, and so on and so forth. Back to the beginning. Better still, maybe at some point, the WBC was the most prestigious of all the belts in circulation. But that's not what's going on today, ladies and gentlemen, and anybody characterizing them as the most prestigious of the 4, given all their sketchy dealings, novelty items, and business practices that arch quite a few eyebrows. In light of all of this, anybody calling them the most prestigious is somebody that hasn't done their fucking homework, because I'm not seeing the prestige. I'm not.